How do we stop treating cloud costs like a budgeting footnote and start recognising them as a genuine business risk? Well, today I'm joined by John Purcell, Chief Product Officer at DoiT, a company helping over 4,000 customers rethink their financial operations. And John brings with him a sharp focus on why the current FinOps conversation, frankly, needs to evolve, moving beyond dashboards and daily burn rates to something far more strategic, intent-aware cost governance that actively defends the business. So as we approach the FinOps X conference in San Diego, we explore the practical and philosophical shifts happening in cloud financial management. And John's going to unpack the common myth that cost optimization is just organizational resilience. It's just a technical cleanup exercise, and will make a strong case for why it should sit alongside security as a pillar of organizational resilience. And he'll also explain why DoiT's cloud intelligence platform was built to support not just savings, but performance, reliability, and cultural alignment across teams. So as automation matures, governance models evolve, and AI continues to reshape how we interact with cloud infrastructure, how should your organisation prepare for what comes next? Hopefully you'll find value in today's conversation. So enough from me. It's time for me to introduce you to today's guest. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, hi, Neil. Good to be with you. So my name is John Purcell, Chief Product Officer at DoiT. I've been at the company about a little over 4.5 years now. It's been quite the journey. Actually, the journey is longer than that. I've been in the B2B software space for almost 30 years in a variety of different company types, large public companies, early stage, sort of VC-backed, scaling private equity companies, all sort of seen the gamut in 30 years, but I spent the first dozen or so of those years in a variety of different go-to-market and operations roles, and then jumped into a sort of a my first really product-specific role about 15 years ago, and I've just kind of led product teams ever since. So seen quite a few things in those years, technology changes and so forth. So that's me.
Awesome. What a story, man. And if we... for people listening that are hearing about DoiT for the very first time, how would you describe it? Introduce everyone listening to it. And also we've got the FinOps Foundation and how that's helping organizations build financial discipline in the cloud era. But tell me all about it for anyone that's just hearing about you guys for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the question, Neil. So DoiT provides an offering that we call DoiT Cloud Intelligence. And DoiT Cloud Intelligence really is the only intent-aware FinOps platform that goes beyond, cost optimization to drive, reliability, performance, and security. And the reason that's important is because we can help turn endless good ideas, if you like, into real implemented solutions, at scale, as you scale, as your technology scales. And the combination of those things is what really ensures that our customers and the teams at our customers, as we like to describe it, are 10x more likely to achieve the business outcomes, the efficiency outcomes, this balance that really FinOps promises. And you're 10x more likely to see those outcomes by leveraging DoiT than really with any other solution.
And it's so refreshing to hear you talk about business outcomes first, not the latest shiny technology. And one of the things that has always puzzled me is how many teams still treat things like cloud cost as a budgeting issue rather than a business risk, which is exactly what it is. But why do you think that framing is so problematic? And how do you recommend organizations maybe shift their mindset now?
Yeah, I think they're connected, Neil. I think, it's probably not budgeting versus business risk. I think they're definitely connected. But, here's how I would think about it. When we think about, cloud costs purely when we look at it purely through a budget lens, when you use terms like budgeting, right, it starts to feel like a constraint that someone else has applied on you, right? It's the budget's coming from somewhere and you're not always sure, where or why, it kind of feels like almost like a distant or maybe an unrelatable thing. And I think that's especially true for technical stakeholders or technology stakeholders at a company. These are the people that maybe are, responsible for ensuring that cloud architecture and the products that they're building on that architecture are working properly and reliably. And so, we at DoiT, we incorporate the concept of risk for a few key reasons. I think, when you make mistakes, or when mistakes happen when you deploy or scale cloud infrastructure, and it happens all the time, Neil, when these things happen, it often creates financial risk, right? It creates cost spikes, unexpected sort of deviations in what you were, hoping for, or expecting, or maybe not even thinking about. And when they happen, and as I said, they happen more than we realize, right? Companies tend to spend a lot of time trying to figure out, why they happened, what actually happened here, and where it happened, and who was responsible, and all of the key questions that go into understanding what a root cause was. And so, the overall investment in time and effort to figure those things out, it just keeps growing. And so it actually, it feels very similar to what happens when we have a security incident or an outage, right, or a service interruption. And so we're always advocating for taking more of a risk management mindset when it comes to cost management. No reasonable, I would ask your audience the following: no reasonable company would ever deploy and run products or applications in their cloud without first ensuring that the right security mechanisms are in place to proactively prevent threats, or in the worst case, detect them as quickly as possible, as close to real time as possible. And so our position on this is that if we apply the same risk and governance principles to cloud financial management, or FinOps, we can move from a reactive mindset, trying to react to something that's happened, to more of a proactive one. And I would just sort of ask this question every day, right? Why would we ever deploy cloud infrastructure without the appropriate cost governance in place? We certainly wouldn't do it without security.
And I think, 10 years ago, there was a big cliche that every company is now a tech company. Over the last 5 years, I think that has shifted to every company is now an AI company. But I would argue that as a result, every company now has an increasing amount of technical debt. So to bring to life what we're talking about here, can you walk me through a real world scenario where unmanaged cloud spend has led to serious financial consequences?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality, to be honest with you, Neil, is that this happens in almost, we're lucky enough to have built relationships with over 4,000 customers. And I think, in truth, we see examples of unexpected cost change or spikes, or what we would call, let's say, cost anomalies in almost every single one of them, to be honest with you. It just happens, the nature of the cloud, it's such a dynamic environment, and access to that cloud environment is so spread across the organization, it's inevitable, right? It's just inevitable that these types of things occur. So, we just need to have the right systems in place, as we've talked about so far. And it can be innocuous, right? It can be simple configuration changes, for example, misconfiguring, the way your CI/CD pipeline works when you're deploying infrastructure, right? Maybe we're spinning up instances to run test environments on the path to deploying, the latest version of your application. And if you don't get that configuration absolutely right, quite often you could just see infrastructure running for longer than you intended.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This happens, and it's not, as I said, it's not intentional, it's not malicious, certainly. It's just a mistake, right? Somebody made a mistake. They just changed the configuration. And there's one example in particular where we saw a massive run up in EC2 compute cost with an AWS customer, right, where they just had instances running for over 24 hours, that should only have run for maybe a few minutes at the most, just accumulating cost. And they racked up over $90,000, right, in AWS compute cost. And in many cases, they don't realize that's happened until the bill shows up. Right? And they realize, goodness, where did this spike come from? And so having having the right governance and proactive, observability system in place here around this stuff can help catch that in near real time and kind of avert what for this customer felt it like a disaster, right? But we've since sort of been able to help them put governance, good governance in place and protect against future occurrences of that. Again, simple mistake, significant impact.
Such a powerful story. I'm glad you've been able to join me on the podcast today. I've been very lucky to pin you down because you must be very busy. The FinOps X conference is just around the corner. I'm curious, are you able to share what themes or challenges that you expect to dominate the discussions this year?
It is just around the corner. Super excited to sort of represent the company. And I think really that conference, if for any of your listeners that are familiar with it, it has come on leaps and bounds over the years since its inception. It's just the practitioner membership of the FinOps Foundation has just really exploded. And I think it speaks to what's going on in the industry around this movement. And I think when, to your question, what do I think? I mean, if you look at the agenda and you sort of look at what's going on within the governance groups and the practitioner membership within the community itself, there's still some dominant themes. So, for example, we think about, workload versus cost optimization. How do we think about optimizing the usage, what we're using, and also what we're paying for it on a unit basis, and making sure that those are in balance? I think that remains a really core concept, with respect to sort of measuring and monitoring what's going on as well as getting that under control and optimizing it. Of course, you can't go to any conference, right now without generative AI sort of dominating the zeitgeist to some degree.
Yeah.
And FinOps is no different. I think everybody wants to know how is AI going to impact cost governance? What are the implications there? And so I think that's going to be, I know the FinOps Foundation itself is starting to publish some frameworks in terms of how to think about that. And this will be a problem, I think, that will exist, or a dynamic, maybe more so than a problem that will exist for several years to come. Automation, always a hot topic, right? How the market has evolved so far over the years, and how it continues to get more and more comfortable with automatic cost optimization, right? There's an interesting relationship between the technology teams and tooling like this. And I think cost optimization and financial governance in general is starting to really benefit from the emergence of advanced automation tooling. And if I could, if I may, just a quick plug for a talk that a couple of DoiT folks are giving, Ryan Pugach and Sebastian Mragovitz, really focusing on solving the puzzle of Kubernetes costs, right? And how we still see a tremendous level of complexity associated with the Kubernetes abstraction framework, and how we can leverage, how DoiT is leveraging automation and visualizing your infrastructure in context to kind of really decode and help solve that cost problem. So excited to hear what the guys have to say about that, and how we might think about best practices there.
Oh, wow. A good teaser. I do love a good teaser. If anyone is attending, I'd love for them to feed back to me what they thought of that. And of course, you've also talked about the importance of moving from passive optimization to active financial defense. So what does that look like in practice for FinOps team? Can you help bring that to life too?
Yeah, I think it's such a fascinating topic, Neil. I think it connects back to the discussion we had earlier about risk, right? About how to think about, or how to inject risk thinking or risk mitigation thinking into the FinOps space. And maybe I'd add a couple of thoughts in this context, right? At DoiT, we tend to think about, when we engage with a company, we tend to want to understand what we call their FinOps fabric, right? And what is the FinOps fabric, right? It's really the combination of the technology, the tooling, the processes, the people, even the organizational structure and the people involved in it, and the behaviors that are flowing through that, and how they all interconnect with respect to cloud financial management. They all have a role. Each of those component pieces, I think, has a role to play here. Stitched together kind of comes up with this sort of fabric concept. And we find that many companies historically tended to focus on pieces of that fabric, right? But what we see and what we're trying to engage with our customers on is that it's the interconnection of all of these pieces that we need to think about to truly make this impact that I talked about earlier, right? This business outcome, this impact that they're seeking or searching for. And I think, right, this idea of moving from passive to active, I think, I would ground this first and foremost in understanding intent, right? Intent or intention. I'll put it this way, right? When we deploy cloud infrastructure, what are we actually trying to achieve with that cloud infra and the technology and services we're deploying? And then making sure that we ensure that we incorporate financial and economic considerations when we declare those things. So let's incorporate financial considerations into the intent. Like, what are we deploying? But how do we think about what it will cost and how we think about that impact on the business performance? And I think just as importantly, we need to broadly understand that intent and then ensure that companies have the right, I would say maybe, governance frameworks, if I could put it that way, in place to guide behavior, to guide process, to guide how people are thinking about this. And of course, make sure that's stitched together and bound together with the right technology, like DoiT Cloud Intelligence, to observe and monitor how we're doing, how well are we actually achieving those outcomes. So that's kind of, what Fabric means to us.
And something else I'm reading more and more about is the FinOps open cost and usage specification, or the much nicer sounding focus, which sounds much better. But how do you see this changing the game, especially when it comes to simplifying and standardizing cloud cost and indeed usage data?
Yeah, I think, look, I think its primary purpose, I think, is quite clear. I think the FinOps Foundation has done a really nice job in staying very focused, pun intended, right, on what they're trying to achieve. And so what the focus, for anyone that's not familiar with it, this specification sets out to define clear requirements, maybe you might consider them as requirements for cloud vendors in particular to produce uniform and consistent cost and usage data sets or artifacts. So the idea would be, if you're running in a multi-cloud environment, that the cost and usage information you're consuming is consistently formatted. And I think it's a pretty interesting concept. I think it is transformative in certain ways, and I think it could make parts of this problem space easier to get our arms around. If we go back. If you go back 10 years, I mean, this is not a new problem, Neil, you probably know, right? This, if you go back about 10 years, one of the first problems we had to get our arms around in this space was how you can quickly absorb, read, and actually make sense of the enormous size and scope of cloud billing records. They're just enormous. It's a big data problem, right? And as we know, cloud usage is tracked, metered, and reported at a very, very granular level, right? It varies by the service you're consuming. Your consumption is not steady state. It's changing all the time. It's changing often at sub-second frequencies. And this is what creates this big data problem, right? And I think while the focus specification itself aims to try to standardize the way that's reported, and that probably will maybe, I want to say simplify, but maybe make it more manageable, irrespective of what cloud you're using, that you're getting that consistent format. What it probably won't solve immediately is the rest of what's going on in that problem space, which is, again, how do we move from reactive to proactive? Some of the questions you'd asked earlier. How do we move to put the right governance system in place? How do we know that we understand intent? Right, and how do we inject sort of a risk mitigation mindset and really achieve those outcomes? So super helpful, solving sort of the beginning part of the problem, and I think we're sort of focused mostly now on the remaining parts.
And I've always thought if you take a look inside any business anywhere in the world, you're going to find lots of different teams that often have more in common than they would care to admit. And when we look at the world of finance and security, they both have similar backgrounds, really very cautious. And security teams have long used severity levels and resolution tracking. And do you think FinOps practitioners should adopt a similar playbook here? Because it feels like there are a few parallels.
There are parallels. Yeah. I mean, I think the short answer is yes, honestly. Right. I think, um, I think being able to align, I mean, so what have these techniques done for us in the world of security or operations? They've helped us, I think, achieve a level of consistency. So when a thing happens, right, we put this label on it. Everybody around the table or around the organization instantly knows what's expected. Right? How do we react to this when a severity X or Y sort of pops up and we declare it that? I think a good FinOps governance, I'll put it back in fabric terms. I think a good FinOps fabric, um, can, would benefit from a similar system simply, right? I think by being able to label a thing that has happened in your, your cloud financial space, with a system of grading or severity grading, I think can help drive the practice and the reaction you want in a standardized way across the organization. And I just think, just to wrap that up, I just think it stitches us back together in a way where we're thinking about risk mitigation. Something happened, severity, whatever, severity 1, severity 0, severity 3. How are we supposed to react? Let's react and let's take care of it and let's move on. Right? That to me is fast response. So I think it absolutely can help.
And if we were to dare to look into the future and the months ahead, what role do you see AI and automation increasingly playing in helping organizations prevent that cloud overspend that we've been talking about today, while also fostering innovation? Because you don't have to sacrifice that as part of this, do you?
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting question. I think, as we talked about earlier, AI is never far. Not only is it never far, it's dominating dominating the sort of the conversation. I think I would probably argue that today that AI is probably driving more cloud spend than it actually is preventing or optimizing it. And I think if I think about your question, sort of AI, automation, and innovation, I think automation to me is a really we're at a really interesting moment with respect to automation. I think today, right, we see, and as I said earlier, we see a changing relationship within companies and the technology teams, a changing relationship with automation driven by third parties, right? Whereas in the past, you might have had a lot of homegrown tooling to help automate sort of repetitive tasks. I think there's an entire ecosystem of companies and vendors, and this whole market has grown up around providing. Why are you building that? Let us provide that to you in a more cost-effective way or in a more logical way, and you can get back to doing what you really want to do, which is innovating for your customers, right? Mm-hmm. And we'll take care of the undifferentiated parts of how you operate. And so, DoiT completed the acquisition of an incredibly innovative company in the Kubernetes space back at the beginning of this year called Perfect Scale. And Perfect Scale lives in this moment, right? It is really taking advantage of the fact that operations teams are now comfortable with automation within their clustered Kubernetes environments, and can see clearly that allowing for that can drive that balance between cost efficiency, performance, and reliability in a sensible and responsible way, right? And once you've established that trust, like Perfect Scale has, that's what I think drives these companies' comfort with automation. And I think this is the moment I really truly believe we're in at the moment as a cloud operations kind of DevOps sort of movement, and I expect that to continue, quite frankly. And whether AI will help accelerate that, or whether it will give us a different set of tools to interact with our cloud and understand what's going on in our cloud and at the very least, will allow us to change the way we ask questions about what's going on in our cloud. Right? It can certainly give us a conversational interface, and maybe open that up or democratize access to this stuff in an interesting way. And that's the approach we're taking today, right? By incorporating generative AI, agentic sort of techniques and so forth. We're now opening up the possibility or the usage of our systems to more and more people within our customer base. And we're just giving them different ways to get to answers quickly. What happened? What happened last month? Why does it look the way it looks? What decisions have we made that are driving this kind of performance or this kind of behavior? Hey, a thing happened, a spike happened. Why did it happen? The system has come up with a recommendation to say, hey, we noticed that you're configured this way. You might be able to optimize or save money by doing that thing. AI can help just contextualize that for maybe non-technical audiences. So there are a lot of use cases, I think, that are opened up here, and it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds.
So many great points there. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insights today. So many great points. And before I let you go, I want to have a bit of fun with you now. We have a tradition on the podcast where I ask my guests to leave either a book that they'd recommend to our Amazon wish list or a song that means something to them that we can add to our Spotify playlist. All I'm going to ask is, what would you like to leave everyone and why?
Well, that's probably the most challenging question you've asked me today, Neil, but I do appreciate it. I think I have too many songs on my list to ever recommend one. So if it's okay, maybe I'll go down the book road with you.
Sure.
And one of the most impactful books that I've read on a professional basis over the last probably 6 or 7. I think I read this book in 2018, 2019, somewhere around there. And the book is called What You Do Is Who You Are, How to Create Your Business Culture by well-known investor Ben Horowitz. He doesn't need my help to promote his book, of course, right? It's obviously a very well-known person in the investing community, but the book itself, I found just compelling, right? I've been, as I've mentioned, I've almost 30 years in the industry, and especially in the last 10 or 12 of those, I've become much more connected to and dialed into how we think about culture, right? And, whether we can actually define culture, whether culture is just a more organic thing that exists. And the trick is to just understand what it is and then nurture it in different ways. And I think that this, I suppose, challenge, if you want to call it a challenge, has become much more dramatic, and since the COVID sort of thing happened to us, where we start to work remotely in hybrid environments, and people are entering the workplace that have never really gone to an office every day, for example. And so culture it's this really interesting, fascinating topic to me. And I think what this book in and of itself deals with is its essential basic premise is that the culture that exists at your company is not defined by the values that you list on the wall, right? That you print and laminate and put on the wall. It's not even really in what you might say in an all hands or company-wide meeting and what you declare are your values. It's not even really in how you market the company, right? These are all ways that you want to sort of promote the values you wish you had and that you aspire to have, to maybe put it that way. But at its core, the culture you've got at your company is defined by the actions you take, right? What it is you actually do on a day in and day out basis, especially in a leadership role. And so for anyone in your audience that's thinking about this space, that's thinking about, either identifying and describing the culture they have, or maybe at some level want to nurture it in a different direction, this is a book that stood out to me and I would highly recommend it.
Love it. I will get that added straight to our Amazon wish list. And for everybody listening wants to find you or your team online, find more information on anything we talked about today, maybe even catch you at the FinOps X conference there. Where's the best starting point for everything?
Yeah, well, look, if any of your audience do happen to be at the FinOps X event in San Diego, we are exhibiting at booth G10. So, of course, stop by and say hello. We'd love to chat and just get into detail, deep discussions, debates, arguments, whatever it might be. This is such a fascinating topic, and we'll have plenty of people there who'll be just would love to get into a conversation with you about that. But if you're not at the event, you can learn all about DoiT and our approach to FinOps and more at doit.com.
Awesome. Well, I'll add links to everything. And I also invite anyone listening, if they are attending the event, also contact myself. Let me know how you got on there. I'm a little bit envious. I can't make it on another event that week, funnily enough. But thank you for that. I'll add the links to everything. And we covered so much today. And I think that main message of cloud cost issues are often seen as optional, unimportant, and easily ignored by FinOps tools. But what I love about what you're doing at DoiT here and is helping organizations embrace risk-focused language and understand it's not about optimizing budgets, but actively protecting the business, building financial resilience, and fostering a culture where fiscal discipline and innovation coexist seamlessly. Sounds a utopia, I know, but it is possible. So thank you for shining a light on this crucial topic. Thanks again.
Thanks so much, Neil.
I think one of the most striking takeaways from today's conversation is how cloud cost management isn't really about costs at all, is it? It's about trust, accountability, risk resilience. And John reminded us that most businesses would never dream of deploying infrastructure without the right security frameworks. And yet cloud financial governance is still treated as almost optional or, at best, a reactive afterthought. But that is thankfully beginning to change. Concepts like FinOps Fabric are helping reframe costs not as a constraint, but as context. And when platforms like DoiT Cloud Intelligent, when that continues to make it easier to align financial discipline with innovation at scale, that's where we start to see real improvement. And yes, it's a tech podcast, so we had to touch on AI's evolving role, not just in forecasting or anomaly detection, but in enabling more people across the business to access those cloud insights without a technical background. And as generative tools begin to democratize that knowledge, maybe we'll finally move closer to a world where cloud cost transparency isn't just for FinOps teams, but also embedded into how every department plans, builds, and delivers. You might say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. So, big question for you, though. I mean, how is your organisation thinking about cloud costs? Is it still someone else's job, or are you treating it as a business-wide responsibility, which is exactly what it is? Please let me know your thoughts. techblogwriter@outlook.com, LinkedIn, X, Instagram, just at Neil C. Hughes. But that's it for today. So thank you for listening as always. I will speak to you all very soon. But until then, I'm afraid it's bye for now.